I trust you're doing well. You're watching RwandaTV News live from Kigali. I'm Ethan Tashabia. This Thursday afternoon, Prime Minister Dr. Edouard Ngirente presented to the joint plenary sitting of the Parliament Rwanda's economic recovery plan to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic with a focus on industrialization. As Sejanor reports, Prime Minister Dr. Edouard Ngirente told Parliament that the government expects to inject about 150 billion Rwandan francs into the country's industrial sector to help it revive.
The parliamentary hearing was held virtually, with the Prime Minister pointing out that the COVID-19 pandemic has hit the world hard, not just one particular sector, with the global economy having grown by 2.8% in 2019 and was expected to grow by as much as 3.6% last year. But that was obviously not what happened. Rwanda's economy was certainly not an exception, doing well and growing by as much as 7.4% until the second quarter of 2020, when it shrunk by an alarming 12%, taking the industrial sector with it. As for the COVID repercussions on Rwanda's industrial sector, I can tell you that in 2020, productivity fell by 4% below zero. The sector had shown encouraging growth during the first quarter, only to plummet to minus 19% in the second quarter. As you know, the toughest preventive measures against the pandemic were implemented during that quarter, and activities to do with economic growth had ground to a halt. Last year saw the creation of a recovery fund by the government, and much of the 100 billion Rwandan francs initially injected into it has already been used by the country's private sector as it struggles to get back on its feet. The industrial sector is being given a lot of attention. With more money being injected into the fund, we expect that it will hit 370 billion Rwandan francs before the end of this year of 2021, an increase of around 250 billion in addition to the 100 billion we started with. Manufacturing plants have already been given more than 955 million Rwandan francs, and before this year is out, an extra 150 million will have been given to them. The parliamentarians also expressed their views and concerns about the industrial sector.
A foundation stone was laid for the construction of a factory named Copper Pharma in the special economic zone, and I wanted to know how far that has gone. The fact is, a factory like that can help our country reduce the currency it spends importing medicine and help Rwandans to get that medicine affordably. A processing plant for powdered milk would be beneficial because that product is easily stored. So one in other parts of the country, not just in Nyagatare, is called for. Honourable Speaker, there is also the matter of a meat processing plant that we had heard of in the east, in Kayonza, but no one knows what became of it. So I believe the Honourable Prime Minister should speak on that as well, because it would really help local residents. Honourable Speaker, local maize production has also been on the rise, and I would like to know if more maize processing plants are to be set up to match those production levels. The Prime Minister told the parliamentarians that another 9 special economic zones are being set up across the country so that the goal of the industrial sector, accounting for 21% of Rwanda's GDP by 2024, is achieved. It currently contributes 19%.
Thank you, sir, for that report. The Military High Court of Kanombe has today, Thursday, March 25th, sentenced retired Major Habib Mudathiru to 25 years in prison after being convicted of 5 charges related to terrorism. We have this report. Towards the end of 2019, retired Major Habib Mudathiru and 31 co-accused were first arraigned in court after being arrested on DRC territory by Congolese national forces and brought to Rwanda to be prosecuted for terror-related charges. Among them are 25 led by retired Major Mudathiru Habib, accused of joining an illegal P5 militia group, plotting to overthrow the current regime, forming alliances with the foreign government to wage war against Rwanda, creating a militant group, and plotting to commit a crime of terrorism. The military prosecution had sought life sentence for the retired Major Habib Mudathiru and his group, accused of plotting acts of terrorism against Rwanda. During the court proceedings, Mudatiru pleaded guilty to 3 charges out of the total 5 leveled against him. The charges he pleaded guilty to include joining a criminal group, conspiracy against an established government or the President of the Republic, as well as maintaining relations with a foreign government intending to wage a war. He denied charges of terrorism. More than a year after the trial started, the Military High Court on Thursday convicted retired Major Habib Mudatiru of 5 counts of joining a criminal group, conspiracy against an established government or the President of the Republic, maintaining relations with a foreign government intending to wage a war, forming a criminal group, as well as participating in the acts of terrorism. The court sentenced retired Major Habib Mudatiru to 25 years in prison. Others sentenced to 25 years in prison include Private Muhire Diodone and Private Ruhinda Jean Bosco, who were identified by the court as members of the High Command of the P5 armed group. In addition to being convicted of the same offenses as Mudatiru, Private Muhire Diodone was also convicted of working with leaders of terrorist groups, including FDLR, RNC, and RRM, inciting people to join the FLN militia group, and dissertation, and the court stripped Private Muhire of his military rank. Private Ruhinda Jean Bosco, who was the communications officer of P5 militia group, was sentenced in absentia because he has not yet been arrested. Nzanzimana Patrick and Captain Rubwana Sraiman were convicted of 4 of the 5 charges against them, and the court acquitted them of conspiracy with a foreign government intending to wage a war because they were not in the top leadership of P5 militia group, thus reducing their sentences to 20 years in prison. Of the 27 remaining defendants, 18 were sentenced to 15 years in prison. 4 defendants were given 8 years in prison. 1 was given 5 years in prison. Another was given 4 years in prison. Another defendant was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison and stripped of his military rank, while 1 other defendant was given 1 year and 6 months in prison, while Captain Kairanga Viator is the only one acquitted, and the court ordered for his immediate release. After the court had read the verdict of the case, some of the defendants appealed the court's decision and submitted their case to the Military Appeals Court. However, retired Major Habib Mudatiru was not among those that immediately appealed the court's decision. Now, still on legal matters, the High Court Chamber of International and Cross-Border Crimes has heard the testimony of Noel Habiyambede, a former lieutenant colonel in the FDLR terror group, who told the court of how armed groups worked with Paul Rusesabagina as a financier to recruitment of fighters in quest to attack Rwanda. Sejonore has this report.
The witness was presented by prosecutors in the terrorism trial against Paul Rusesabagina and 20 others, and he told the court that he first became acquainted to Paul Rusesabagina over the phone back in 2006, introduced by a man named Proje Utikanga, aka Malumba, who lived in Belgium at the time. In 2007, Noel Habiyaremye fell sick and went for treatment in Lusaka, Zambia, where he met Apollinaire Senjiyumva, another individual often mentioned in this trial. He would later also meet Innocent Minani at Senjiyumva's house, and Minani, who had come from Belgium, would give him Rusesabagina's phone number so they could talk. Their discussions revolved around recruiting seasoned fighters for the PDR party of Rusesabagina, which is also why Paul Rusesabagina had also reached out to another colonel by the name of Tarsis Niturende, insisting that they get fighters from the FDLR terrorist group that was at the time breaking up into factions. Rusesabagina sent the men more than $2,000 to help them to get to Burundi, one traveling from Lusaka, the other from North Kivu via Nairobi in Kenya, and they would meet up in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where Paul Rusesabagina would send them another $3,000 through Innocent Minani. Money also meant to help Noel Habiyaremye get around because he had no transit documents and was using Congolese ID papers. Tarsis Niturende was familiar with General Adolphe of the Burundian rebel group CNDD-FDD from his time there, and after consultations with Rusesabagina, it was decided that they should go to Burundi to ask that individual for assistance when it comes to matters of intelligence gathering, equipment and safe passage to be able to attack Rwanda. They went to Burundi in 2009, and the general told them that he would first discuss the matter with other officials, and they reported back to Rusesabagina what he had said, adding that they had communication problems and needed to buy satellite phones to overcome that challenge. Paul Rusesabagina then sent them around $3,000 via Western Union in Bujumbura.
They were arrested the next time they went to Burundi and were extradited back to Rwanda, never to speak to Rusesabagina again. They were tried for their crimes, and Noel Habiyaremye was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, serving his time behind bars and completing his sentence. Prosecutors stressed that his testimony on Thursday and that of Dr. Michael Martin on Wednesday show how long Paul Rusesabagina had been engaged in terrorism activities before his arrest, starting with the PDR Ihumure party and working diligently to get it to collaborate with the FDLR. The prosecutors also showed how Providence Rubingisa, another individual who kept coming up in Dr. Michael Martin's testimony on Wednesday, was linked to PDR Ihumure's operations, working on its committee on a global level before joining RNC in 2010. Questioning in the US by Belgian police officers in March 2019 also found that Rubingisa was also involved in raising funds and finding recruits for the FDLR, speaking to people like Fernando Ngamije and a priest whose name is yet to be made public. He also called on FDLR fighters to attack places like Gisenyi and Ruhengeri in Rwanda, the objective being to suggest that the country was not secure. Prosecutors pointed out that organizations like the Hotel Rwanda Rusesabagina Foundation were being used to fund terrorist groups. They then detailed the founding of the MRCD coalition of parties and its FLN military wing, and the attacks in Rwanda's districts of Nyaruguru, Nyamagabe and Rusizi between 2018 and 2019. As well as the way Rusesabagina had been obsessed with having a military group at his disposal right from the time he founded the PDR Ihumure party, saying there can be no politics if you don't have an army. The trial will continue on Wednesday, the 31st of March, with prosecutors presenting evidence against another in the group, Herman Senjimana, who replaced Calixte Nsabimana as the spokesperson of the FLN group after the man that calls himself Sankara was arrested.
Now, moving on, the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa says it is going to hold discussions with their private partners in finding a way of manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines in Africa so as to try and reduce the gap between the number of vaccines distributed to developing countries as those are going to developing countries. Our very own Jen Mutoni tells us more.
In Rwanda, over 340,000 residents have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. The first group to be vaccinated included the elderly.
This will help me not to live in fear of COVID-19 as a threat to my life. But this also doesn't mean that I will stop wearing a face mask and to practice social distancing. The main importance is to help us survive through this pandemic. This is the first dose that is going to be administered to us. And so we are looking forward to the second one.
During the WHO virtual press conference on the COVID-19 pandemic and the rollout of COVAX vaccines in Africa, the Director General of the Rwanda Biomedical Center said the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines in Rwanda has been a success so far.
We look forward to get more vaccines. There's a lot of work happening now to access the doses. But in terms of deployment, in terms of data follow-up and advanced events management, we also had a lot in place, and we are happy that the vaccine has been deployed in a safer manner. The follow-up of everyone who had received the first shot is going well. We don't have complication or incidents or whatever, as you can imagine, but it actually is happening very smoothly. The only challenge is we need just doses and make it happen and continue to reach our target, which is 6% of our population vaccinated by next year. But if we can bring it now, we can do it now. Why not achieving it in the next couple of months?
A professor of global health and sustainable development at the University College London stressed that COVID-19 vaccines are safe and people should stop spreading false rumors as this may cause hesitancy, hence slowing down the process of vaccination in Africa.
So the message should go out, these are safe vaccines. And although you get scares like we've had a big scare in Europe over, clotting and the like, which actually has turned out to be, I think, overhyped. The brutal reality is that getting this infection is way more dangerous to people than any tiny risk associated with the vaccine. And I think we need to get that message out, because when you get scare stories or misinterpretation in the media of small studies, this can create vaccine hesitancy.
Between 3 and 5 billion vaccines are usually produced across the globe every year, but those figures have now increased by between 3 to 5 times because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, a total of 7.7 million vaccines have been distributed in Africa. However, there has been an issue of some high-income countries that look forward to vaccinate their total population as other countries struggle to vaccinate a significant proportion. This was mentioned by the Immunization and Vaccine Development Program Coordinator, Dr. Mihigo Richard, during the press conference.
It is unfair, I believe, that some high-income countries are looking to vaccinate their entire populations, while others, and particularly including most in our region, are struggling to reach a significant proportion of at-risk population. So through the COVAX facility, we are exploring ways of increasing vaccine equity. One possible solution is by collaborating with high-income countries that have surplus vaccine stocks to share their doses. Another is to promote technology transfer and reduce intellectual property barriers. We are also working with partner organizations and member states to strengthening local vaccine production in Africa. WHO is also encouraging collaboration with the private sector to help procure and distribute COVID-19 vaccine, such as the initiative by the South African telecom firm, MTN, that has delivered over 720,000 doses to 9 African countries.
Currently, 32 African countries have managed to vaccinate the first group of people who are most vulnerable to COVID-19 virus, while 10 countries are yet to receive a single dose. Over 4 million people in Africa have been infected and 110,000 have died because of COVID. Jane Mutoni reporting for RTV.
Thank you, John, for that report. Now, this Thursday, the newly appointed Roman Catholic Church Bishop of Cyangugu Diocese, Sinayobe Edward, was consecrated. The ceremony was held in Rusizi and attended by the Cardinal Antoine Kambanda, the representative of the Vatican Holy See in Rwanda, among other church and local government leaders. The consecration ceremony was officiated by the Minister of Local Government, Jean-Marie Vianney Gatabazi, on behalf of President Paul Kagame. Edward Sinayobe, a former rector of the Preparatory Seminary of Nyumba in Butare Diocese, was on February 6, 2021, appointed Bishop of Cyangugu Diocese by Pope Francis to replace the foreign Bishop Bibenyimana Jean Damascene, who passed away in 2018. Minister Gatabazi told the congregation that the government of Rwanda and the head of state is pleased with the blossoming relations between the government and the Catholic Church. Minister Gatabazi also congratulated Bishop Sinayobe upon assuming the new clerical role and urged the Church to be at the center of fighting COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on, the Ministry of Gender and Family Promotion indicates that reforming the national gender policy and taking it to the broader lines of the country will make the principle of gender equality clearer and than it has been in the last 11 years. Innocent Mugabo has this report.
In a meeting with members of the National Consultative Forum of Political Organizations, NFPO, on the reform of the national gender policy, the Minister of Gender and Family Promotion, Professor Baisenje Jeanette, explains that in the 11 years that the national gender policy had been in place, it is time to reform.
There has been a lot of changes, whether it is about the broad lines that the country is giving, whether it is taking action in new issues that are emerging in the Rwandan society, or those that escalate. Those are some of the things we considered while making changes. We have a vision for 2050, NST1, family conflicts, and not forgetting teenage pregnancies. We aim to revisit the emphasis but focus on the private sector because they employ more people and gender is often implemented by government agencies.
For this gender policy to be revised, it will also include teaching and action planning at all levels.
If we allow people to put the principle of equality into action, it will be held accountable. If they are included in performance contracts, that means they will be awarded according to what they have done and that the principle of equality is in place. Another thing is that the teaching of gender equality, as it has been shown that the principle of gender is misunderstood, where they talk about gender and some feel that women are more dominant than men.
The representatives of political organizations find this policy worthy of solid teachings. There is a need for family education, for people who want to get married to know that they need to build a stable family.
One thing to keep in mind is that attitudes indicate interests, because when someone is told that this thing has an interest, they quickly understand it. If men get to understand that partnership is more productive, then it would be a very nice thing. We'll also get to know the difference between a city and the countryside in terms of mindset.
At the meeting of the National Consultative Forum of Political Organizations, there was also an election to replace a number of officials in the forum. Honorable Uwingabe Solange of the Rwandan Socialist Party PSR was elected as the spokesperson of the forum, assisted by Njiruwonsanga Jean de Mansen of the Democratic Union of the Rwandan People, UDPR, for a 6-month term, and Honorable Uwingabe says that, in general, the focus will be on national development and capacity building for women.
We will focus on achieving the mission of the main forum through exchanging views on problems that our country is facing. The other is strengthening women participation in political activities.
Gisagara Theonest was also elected as the executive secretary of the forum, and 3 permanent committees were set up for a 5-year term that can be extended only once. Innocent Mogabo, RTV News.